You hear a lot of strange things as a cop. Desperate screams, shattered voices, static-laced cries for help. But this was different. It wasn't just a call. It was a voice from beyond the grave. It was a late shift deep into the winter of 1976. The roads were slick with ice, and the town was quiet. The kind of eerie quiet that makes your skin crawl. I was alone in my patrol car, parked under a dim street light, sipping bad coffee, trying to shake off the exhaustion. Then, my radio crackled to life. "Officer down. Need assistance. Corner of Miller and 5th. The voice was urgent, strained, the kind of fear you don't fake. I straightened up, heart pounding. That part of town was deserted at this hour, no active patrols nearby. I grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, did you get that? Who's calling in?" Silence. Just static. Then, the voice again. "Please, help. We train for these moments. You don't question it, you respond." I slammed the car into gear, lights flashing, tires skidding over the frozen road as I tore through the empty streets toward Miller and 5th. The buildings loomed dark and lifeless. No headlights, no backup, no sign of another officer. But my radio was still crackling. "I don't have much time. Please." The voice was weaker now, like it was fading. I stepped out of the car, hand on my holster, scanning the street. The only sound was the wind whistling through the alleyways. The air felt wrong, like the entire world was holding its breath. I radioed in. "Dispatch, I'm at Miller and 5th. No visual on any officers. Who made that call?" "We don't have any calls logged 1021. I froze. That wasn't possible. I heard it. I was still hearing it. Then, from the static, a whisper. "He doesn't know he's gone." My blood ran cold. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Faint blue and red lights flickering against the frost-covered pavement. A wrecked squad car, mangled beyond recognition, resting in the shadows of the alleyway. And inside, the silhouette of an officer slumped over the wheel. I stepped closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. The badge number was still visible on the shattered glass. It belonged to Officer James Carter. Dead. Since 1971, I staggered back, breath hitching. My radio crackled one last time. "Thank you for coming." Then, silence. I never heard that voice again. But every time I drive past Miller and 5th, I swear I still see those faint blue and red lights flickering in the distance. A squad car that isn't there. A call for help that never really ended.
I faced down armed suspects, chased criminals through dark alleys, and walked into situations where I wasn't sure if I'd make it out alive. But nothing has ever shaken me like what I saw that night. Because that night, I came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. It was a cold Texas night in the winter of 1996, the kind of night where the wind howls through the empty streets, rattling windows and making shadows dance. I was on patrol, parked just off a lonely stretch of highway, taking a few minutes to rest my eyes. The radio was silent. The world felt still. Then tap, 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 knuckles against the glass of my patrol car. I jolted awake. My hand instinctively went to my holster as I turned to the window. And that's when I saw them. 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing just outside my car. They couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. Pale skin, dark hoodies, standing unnaturally still. Their heads tilted slightly downward, as if trying to avoid my gaze. Then, the boy spoke. "Officer, can you help us?" His voice was flat, emotionless. too calm for two kids alone in the middle of the night. Something felt wrong. I swallowed hard and cleared my throat. "What are you two doing out here? Where are your parents?" They didn't answer right away. Instead, the girl slowly raised her head. And that's when I saw them. Their eyes, completely black. Not just dark, pitch black. No whites, no pupils, just endless voids. A deep, instinctual dread slammed into my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get away, but I couldn't move. Then the boy spoke again. "We can't come in unless you invite us." My breath caught in my throat. They weren't just asking for help. They were asking for permission. I forced my hand to the ignition, desperate to get out of there, but the girl leaned in closer. "Please, officer." The words were soft, almost pleading, but her expression never changed. That's what scared me the most. There was no fear, no sadness, just emptiness. I clenched my jaw and shook my head. No. And just like that, they were gone. I blinked. The space outside my car was empty, as if they'd never been there at all. But I knew what I saw, and I knew that whatever those things were, they weren't children. To this day, I refuse to talk about that night with anyone on the force, because the few times I've brought it up, I get the same reaction. A long, uneasy stare and a quiet warning. If you ever see them again, don't speak. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, never invite them in.
I still get chills when I think about that night. It was late, past midnight, when I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway on the outskirts of town. The road was quiet, swallowed by darkness. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of my patrol car rolling over the asphalt. It had been an uneventful shift, just another long night of routine patrols. But that was before I saw her, a lone figure standing on the side of the road, barely illuminated by my headlights. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. After all, what kind of person would be out here in the dead of night, all alone? But as I got closer, I could see her clearly. A young woman, shivering in a thin coat, her long, dark hair cascading over her face. She raised one arm and waved. I slowed the car, my instincts kicking in. Maybe she had car trouble. Maybe she was in danger. Or maybe, just maybe, I should have kept driving. I rolled down my window. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She nodded. Didn't say a word. Just nodded. There was something off about her. Something I couldn't put my finger on. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, and her expression was blank, distant, like she wasn't really there. Still, I unlocked the door. "Hop in. Where are you headed?" She slid into the passenger seat without a sound. As soon as she shut the door, a wave of cold filled the car, sharp and unnatural. The heater was on, but suddenly it felt like winter had seeped through the cracks. I glanced at her. "Miss, are you okay?" Silence. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. The unease in my chest grew heavier, but I shook it off and kept driving. A few minutes passed before she finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Take me home." It sent a chill through me. "Where's home?" I asked. She didn't answer, just raised her hand and pointed straight ahead. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept driving. For the next several minutes, the road stretched endlessly in front of us. I tried asking more questions, what her name was, if she needed help, but she didn't respond. Then, just as we reached a rundown house at the edge of the road, she finally spoke again. "Stop here." I hesitated, glancing at the house. It looked abandoned. Shutters hanging loose, weeds consuming the yard, no lights, no sign of life. "Are you sure this is—" I turned to face her, and she was gone. The seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard a sound, but she was just gone. I slammed the car into park, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hands were shaking as I reached for my flashlight and stepped out, scanning the area. Nothing. No footprints, no movement. Just an empty road and a hollow silence that made my skin crawl. I approached the house cautiously, knocked on the door. After a long pause, it creaked open, and an elderly man stepped out, his eyes heavy with something that looked like grief. "Can I help you, officer?" he asked. I swallowed. I picked up a woman on the highway. She asked me to bring her here. Young, long hair, thin coat. The man's face went pale. His hands trembled slightly as he exhaled. "You saw her," he murmured. My stomach twisted. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. I wouldn't like the answer. The man turned, staring out into the darkness. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She died in a car crash, right on that road, 10 years ago." A sharp chill ran through me. I didn't say another word, just slowly turned back to my car. And when I opened the driver's side door, I stopped, because there, on the passenger seat, was a single, wet footprint. I left. I never drove that road again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, if I'd never stopped at all, would she still be standing there waiting?
You never expect a place like a police station, a place built on law, order, and logic, to be haunted. But I'm telling you now, some things defy logic. And what I saw, what I experienced, still lingers in the back of my mind, like a shadow that refuses to fade. It started on a night shift, sometime past 2 a.m. That eerie hour when silence feels heavier, when shadows seem to move on their own. I was alone at the station, or at least, I was supposed to be. The others were out on patrol, leaving me with nothing but the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of the radio. The air felt off, heavy, like the walls themselves were breathing. I was at my desk, filling out reports, when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the corridor. At first, I thought it was one of the guys coming back early. I called out, "Hey, that you?" But there was no answer. The footsteps continued, closer. Then they stopped, right outside my office door. A cold chill ran down my spine. I stood up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The station was old, sure, and creaky floorboards weren't unusual. But this was different. It wasn't the random groan of an aging building. These were footsteps. And whoever, or whatever, was making them was standing right outside. I swallowed hard and stepped toward the door, hand hovering over my belt. Not for my gun, but for my flashlight. I reached for the handle, swung it open. Nothing. An empty hallway stretched before me, bathed in dim, flickering light. The air was ice cold. I exhaled, forcing a chuckle. Get a grip, man. But then, from further down the hall, past the holding cells, past the old evidence room, came a sound. A low, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn around, go back to my desk, and pretend I heard nothing. But I was a cop. This was my station. I had to check it out. I moved down the hallway, flashlight in hand, its beam slicing through the dim light. The scraping continued, coming from the evidence room. I reached the door and gripped the handle, turned it. The door creaked open. The room was empty. Shelves lined the walls, holding old case files and sealed boxes of evidence. Nothing was out of place, but the air, it was suffocatingly cold. My breath fogged in front of me, and then, from behind me, a whisper. "Get out!" I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. No one. But I wasn't alone. I felt it, a suffocating presence, pressing against me, unseen but undeniable. And then my eyes flickered to the window at the end of the room. And I swear to you, there was a figure standing there, a shadowed silhouette, staring at me. I bolted, rushed out, slammed the door shut, and didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the cold night air like a drowning man. The next morning, I told my superior officer what happened. He didn't even blink, just exhaled through his nose, shook his head and muttered, "You saw him, huh?" I frowned. "Who?" He leaned back in his chair. "We don't know who he is. We just know he's always been here, ever since they built this place, on an old burial ground. I never worked the night shift alone again, and to this day, when I pass by that old police station, I never look at the windows, because I know he's still there, watching